This video is made possible by Hey there, welcome back to a new episode of Tutorial Tuesday about the remix. In this season I talk about my remix of Zomboy's Here to Stay featuring Lady Chan, which has now been released as a free download on my SoundCloud profile. To go there and download the track, click the link in the description below this video. Last week I showed you the first part of the intro and today I'll continue with the next part. So first I'll play the second 8 bars of the intro. Let's get started.
Yeah, Zomboy, alongside your girl, Lady Chan, ripping straight from the sunset to far. Yeah.
As you can see, this second 8 bars are not that much different from the first 8 bars, but still some new elements are added and some changes are made. The most prominent change is the rise in volume on the chords. This instantly fills out the intro and makes it sound a lot more full and warm. The other element that we've talked about in the previous video is the piano, which is also continued during the entire track. So to know more about the piano or the chords, please watch my previous video. So next I've also added some elements to these 8 bars. The first one to talk about is the reggae style bassline that was included in the remix pack. I've only used it during the intro and the outro of the track, but it makes them a lot more solid. Without the bassline, it would sound like something is missing in the low frequencies. So to counterattack that, I put the loop in there, but pretty low in the mix, so it just sits below everything and follows along with the other elements. There's not much processing on this loop either, just a little saturation to warm things up and drive the volume a bit, then some sidechain compression that is triggered by the kick drum to keep the kick and bass from clashing with each other. So this brings us to the next part that I've added, which are the main drums. The main drums consist of multiple layers. The first layer is a breakbeat loop that I've chopped up and rearranged so it works with this track. This is a pretty simple yet effective technique to spice up your drum section without too much work on arranging. So for the processing on this loop, I have an instance of EQ8. This time to enhance the hi-hats and cymbals and also to get rid of the kick drum in the loop. I needed to take the kick drum out with an EQ, otherwise it wouldn't sound that well with my own kick drum. So next is the main kick drum I used in this track. Without any effects, it would sound like this. It's already a pretty beefy kick, but with some processing I was able to make it sound a lot better. So the first thing I did is I cleaned up the kick by using some EQ. This takes away some of the mud in the low mids, but it also takes away some of those harsh, high frequencies, since I thought this kick was a bit sharp to the ear. So the next thing I added to the kick is an auto filter, which is only used during the intro. It is set to a low pass filter so that during the intro the drums sound more soft because most of the high frequencies are being filtered out while the low pass filter is fully opened when the main track starts, so it sounds much more aggressive. This is actually something I added during the mixing stage, so I could give the track the perfect feeling during both the intro and the rest of the track. So this is without the low pass filter on the kick.
Yeah, Zomboy.
And this is with.
Yeah, Zomboy. Alongside your girl.
Clearly a big difference if you ask me. So then I've added an instance of the new glue compressor in Live 9. I use this to control the transients of the kick drum, making it even more fat than it already was. Finally, I've added one more instance of EQ8 to control and sculpt the final outputted sound of the kick drum. I also took out some mid-frequencies to make it less muddy, and I've increased the high frequencies a bit to make it punch through the final mix. Next is the snare drum. On the snare I've used an instance of EQ8 to take out the sub-frequencies, but this time I used the standard high pass and not the high pass times 4. I found that the new high pass times 4 mode sounded a little awkward on this snare, and actually this snare can have some good low frequencies since the snare is not layered with the kick drum. So then I added some compression to control the transients again, just like I did with the kick drum. This makes the snare sound fat and punchy. After the compression, I added a saturator which basically works like a limiter, cutting everything above 0 dB. And you can control the amount of drive. So just a couple of dB on the drive usually works pretty well. So finally on here I have an EQ to cut off all the sub-frequencies and also increase the high frequencies. This cleans up the snare and makes it punch through the mix a bit better. So then for the drums group bus, on there are some basic things. First on there I have a high pass filter which I use during the build-ups to filter out all the low frequencies and drop them back in when the drop hits. This makes the drop seem a lot more bigger and fatter and in your face. Then I have two compressors, which both have their own purpose. The first compressor is the new Live 9 the glue compressor, and with this one I only compress the peaks of the kick and snare just a tiny bit, just to control any unwanted volume spikes. Then the second compressor is the glue by Cytomic, which the new Live 9 compressor is based on. With this one I use some parallel compression to fatten up this drum group and bring the breakbeat sample more up front. On to the next part, which are the vocals. I've slightly changed the vocals a bit, adding some effects to them to make them more interesting compared to the original track. To me the vocals sounded quite dry, so I added an interesting delay to this vocal.
Yeah,
So you can see I have a send track set up with an instance of ping pong delay and a saturator afterwards. Then I've automated the send amount on specific words in the vocal. So the cool thing about this is that the delay is often short and stabby and it doesn't use the entire word or vocal but only a portion from it. Here's how I did that. I've drawn in the automation, but as you can see the automation stops before the word is finished, making the delay shorter. For instance, this is the delay when I solo it. Now on this part of the word Zomboy, I've automated the delay, but it stops before the word boy is finished, leaving the tail of the word unaffected. Pretty cool, right?
Why?
So I've automated that throughout the track to make the vocal a bit more interesting.
Why? Alongside your girl, Lady Sean. Repping straight from the Sun Cycle farm.
So let's pick up the pace a bit and make our way through the final part of the intro, since you guys probably don't mind watching a slightly long tutorial. So the next part is where the main drum pattern kicks in, using the kick and snare I talked about just now. It sounds like this. Then after that I also bring in the percussion, which consists of some hi-hats that I placed in a little sequence. So it's an open ride sample that hits on every beat, and a closed hi-hat that hits on the offbeats. For the processing on these hats, it's all quite simple. Mostly an EQ to take off the low frequencies, which is very important with hi-hats, since they tend to contain quite a lot of low frequencies. How weird that may sound when talking about a hi-hat. The other thing I also like to do is add a little bit of saturation to give the hats a bit more grit. So the saturation usually works like a limiter, so it cuts off everything that's peaking above 0 dB without too much distortion and artifacts. Then for the percussion group bus, I have an instance of the Live 9 The Glue compressor where I loaded the Rock Parallel Room preset from the Live device browser. After that I've added a final EQA to make sure no low frequencies are being brought up back by the compression. So you can hear, when I turn the percussion group off, is that the drum part sounds weak and uninteresting, but when the percussion is added, it sounds a lot more open and wide and has a higher perception of tempo, making the track feel faster. Okay, so let's see. Oh yeah, one thing I forgot in the previous part is the effects group. These are just some samples and sounds I've took from various sample packs and used them to fill up my tracks. Note that I had to make this track in a couple of days before the deadline of the competition, so I used some samples from Vengeance packs, but normally I do create these sounds myself when I have the time to do so. So what did I do? I have used some down sweeps, up sweeps and a big reverb kick drum. The big kick drum is only used at the start of the main track during the intro, and I have taken out all of the low frequencies with an EQ8. I did this because the reverb kick is layered with my own kick drum, and my own kick drum is the one which provides the low end. Then that reverb kick is layered with this downsweep sample, which basically is nothing more than some filtered white noise with some reverb and a delay. Together they create this nice start for the tune. So then I have this upsweep sample that leads you right into the breakdown and build-up section. Nothing too fancy, and I could have easily made this myself, but when you're trying to make a deadline, sometimes you just need to take what works and go on. You can always come back at it and improve it. And I made this track in only 2 days, so I was pretty happy with how it turned out. So then on the third and final part of the intro, I have a shortened version of the downsweep sample that sort of marks the start of the first main drum loop. Then followed by a short upsweep leading you into the next part of the track. The thing is that these little effects make the transitions in your track a lot more fluid, but don't just take whatever effect you can find. Experiment with different kind of downsweeps and upsweeps, or maybe try some totally different effects and try to find one that really adds something to the final track. So that leads us to the final thing in this video, that brass type sound that is also in the original by Zomboy. I did change it a little bit by processing it with effects. So again, you can see I've used some heavy automation on both the filter cutoff and filter resonance on an instance of auto filter which is set to a low pass. This spices up the loop and makes it sound a bit different. It's a simple yet effective technique. Then on here I've added an EQ8 to make sure there are no unwanted low frequencies in the sound. Then I've added one of my own custom live devices called the ARTFX. It's a very powerful tool for making your sounds fatter and more spread in the stereo field by slightly delaying the left channel from the right channel. It's easy to set up using an audio effect rack, 2 chains bent hard left and hard right, and a simple delay with the time knob mag to a macro knob on the audio effect rack. For this one I also made a 3rd chain which is centered and unaffected, but you don't have to do that. I did this just to bring the volume up a little bit. This device will be uploaded soon on the ARTFX website and will be available for free download for all registered members of the site. Then on this little sample I've added an instance of Cytomic the Glue, with which I used a pretty aggressive compression preset. This whole compression really brings up the volume of the loop and makes it much louder in the mix. Then finally I've added the auto filter I talked about earlier, which adds some nice filtering to the sound, which definitely makes it a lot more interesting to listen to. Oh yeah, before I forgot, I also introduced a little change to the chords on the final part of the intro. What I did is I added in an extra chord to the notes, which makes this section feel a bit faster than the previous section of the intro. It's just the same chord again, nothing too difficult. So that's it for this second in a row of special videos about this remix. Next week I'll continue on with the breakdown and build up. For all your questions, click the bottom left to tweet them to @ARTFX Studios and I'll answer them as soon as possible. Or click the bottom right and become a member of the ARTFX website to share your music, give to, and receive feedback from other users and just have a great time on the forum. Subscribe for more tutorials and have a nice day. See ya.